Well, good afternoon to you, Scott Baker, and to my new best friend in the world, Megan Sharon, because she and I just spent a fantastic week together in Utah.
We
And
did.
so,
Ah,
quite literally, my best friend. So,
well,
everyone who's here, welcome.
here's how this is going to go. Then I'm going to say, "Welcome to Lead Better." Field note number 1580. The title is "Can People Be Too Positive?" Okay, so Megan, tell us some stories about Mikey in Utah. What really happened?
I can't say enough about it. It was just a
Huh?
phenomenal experience. It really was from start to finish.
Right.
And I thought it would be good, but I didn't think it would be as great as it was. Yeah, just good
Oh,
energy.
and I want the real. Did you have to post bail for Mikey? I mean, what was the
He's,
real
yeah, he's
story?
baiting you into not being too positive. That's what's going
Oh
on
yeah,
here.
there we go.
Oh
That's
no, I was going to say because actually you can count on me for a level of cynicism, which we'll probably talk about.
it.
I would give it to you, but I don't know. It was really
No,
it was
it
one
was
of the
too good.
I got it. I'm not gonna lie. It took
Hmm.
me a little bit by surprise. I think Mikey, you probably got that by the end. I'm like, this was such a great trip. I am actually toxically positive about that Utah experience because it was
Yeah,
that
There you go.
yeah. Her first experience was on horseback, though. So, there may have been a little bit of a, I don't know how the rest of this week is going to go.
well,
But
fly
then every
fishing.
activity got better after that, even. It was great.
I thought horseback riding was a high. Fly fishing,
Hmm.
I did
A little
not
more
as I
challenging.
not as aligned. Yes, for
Hmm.
some, maybe for me, but not for everybody. But yeah, just overall good. And Mikey is a very capable driver. I tend to say capable when I'm trying to
Yes.
acknowledge someone for just kind of doing something they should be able to do, but capable is
I'm
spot on.
definitely making my wife listen to this one. I'm so glad you
Yeah.
said
Well,
that.
that because that you don't know this, but we've talked for the years of doing this conversation. It comes up from time to time, not all the time. That Mikey is actually not allowed to drive in his family. His wife
Yes.
drives, but Mikey parks. So his
Yes.
wife drives to places, and then when they get there, they swap seats, and Mikey parks the car.
Yeah, we've
We
done that a
can't.
couple
We can't.
times.
We actually cannot explain that anymore because it would take the rest of our time together here today. But you have already used the phrase toxic positivity, which is this idea that the field note is pushing, which is saying, is it possible? Could it be true? Would we envision a world where people could be too positive? Aren't we generally trying to get people to be more positive? So, what? How would you, Megan Sharon, define toxic positivity?
It almost, I think it's positive to the nth degree, where it's almost as if you're
Okay.
kind of not, you're outside of intention and you're just kind of, it's an intentional effort just to put a shine on everything. It's a little cheerleader
Mm-hmm.
in terms of that, just everything is good all the time unilaterally. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that
Right.
oftentimes it's got a cost, right? Because it comes to your credibility and what have you. But I don't know. I think toxic positivity is that everything is always a bright side. Everything always has a silver lining. I appreciate positivity as much as the next guy, but at a certain point, it's kind of how much is too much.
Well, Mikey, I think of you as a positive, upbeat person, and I don't know if you were always that way or if you worked on it, but I grew up in the era, slightly older than everybody, back when Zig Ziglar was still out there, and there were books about positive attitudes, and if you just kind of had the right kind of self talk. And I mean, it turns out in the literature, there is actually a lot of merit to much of that.
Hmm.
But it is true that that can kind of then have its downsides, which is the field
Yes.
note is pointing to this idea that if you're having these sort of generalizations about how great things are all the time, you not only could be like deluded, but you could actually be causing, which I put in bold in the field note, grave harm.
Yeah.
Right.
So, Mikey, where do we cross this line from kind of being the encouraging, positive person to being the person that we think we're doing great, but we're actually digging everybody into a deep hole?
Yeah, I think that line kind of exists the same way in the way that we talk about servant leadership, right?
Okay.
Those that are strong proponents of servant leadership treat it as a principally based approach to your leadership so that you're always thinking like a servant.
Hmm.
Now, should leaders, have a servant attitude in much of what they do? Yeah. But then there's holes in that because there's times where you definitely do not want to be a servant. And I
Yeah.
think of this as the same way. Those that are like toxically positive are the kinds of people who like just think of this as the one note that they hit. It is the principle that they live by to be infectiously positive all the time. And so there's this moment of lack of credibility that creeps in when you meet a guy like Ted Lasso, because you feel like there's no way that this guy could be for real, right? And so you can even
just
tell
to point
him,
out, Ted Lasso actually is not real. You could meet a guy like Ted Lasso.
Yes,
there are
exactly.
real people perhaps like that. Yeah.
Right. And so the real criticism around Ted Lasso is the way that his initial approach and impression with people are that he was just a bumpkin. So he did some damage to his own credibility in the early days of the show, right? As he was meeting people, because they thought of him as just this aloof kind of so positive that he wasn't rooted in reality.
In reality, right.
And so as you unpacked who Ted Lasso was, even the show writers allowed you to see he's not actually toxically positive, right? He's not.
Oh, in the reality, right? It's covered. There's a sad clown inside.
Yes. So and there's a depth to him, right?
So Meghan, in the leaders that you're coaching in all kinds of spheres at very high levels, I would imagine leaders can't get to the kind of positions where they're engaging you, where there's not a degree of positivity about them. But I mean, have you really encountered that many leaders who you would say, you gotta dial it back? Like you're just smiling way too much.
Yeah, and I think that it's the classic. Any strength, when overdone, potentially becomes a liability. That's therein is your weakness. So again, we love confidence. Confidence overcalibrated becomes arrogance. Same thing with positivity. I think it's and I think what we haven't said yet is this idea of positivity and also optimism. I mean, optimism, especially in the work that we do, we kind of really espouse optimism as a mindset, that really is the belief that, that all things are possible. Positivity is more of an expression, I think, more of an emotion in terms of, like it's a little bit more rah-rah. It's a little bit more, everything's fine, nothing to see here kind of thing. So I think it isn't often that I see leaders that are wildly positive without kind of an appropriately calibrated, kind of optimism, if you will. So I think and I think as with everything, and Mike, I think you alluded to this, it's about having range, right? What's appropriate for the situation that I'm in? What is needed here? Who do I need to be?
Right.
A lot of leader identity. And I think positively plays so squarely in that.
Yeah. Well, we sometimes talk about the need for even leaders in dire situations to frame things in a hopeful scenario, right? Where we're saying, look, here's where we are. We've had some positive indicators, but as you know, we're having some real regulatory problems. We're probably going to have to shut down this division. We may need to lay off some people, but here's where I see things going, right? So there can be a gravity to how they're analyzing the seriousness of the situation, but yet saying, if we do this and we do this and we do this, I think by the third quarter of next year, we're on the right track. Now, is that a good way of kind of bridging and balancing expectations?
Well, I think it demonstrates that there is a fair and balanced view around kind of what can we be excited about, where are we feeling bullish, what are our watch outs, and what are we, it's this idea of even, realism, what's actually true and real versus kind of what we see. And I think those are really the leaders that we want to follow, are ones that we feel like, been doing a lot of feedback work lately. And one of the things that comes up in that conversation is, do you feel like you understand? A leader tells you what you need to know to be successful. Same thing in this respect. Is a leader kind of using an appropriate amount of positivity to really kind of motivate and inspire, but also gives a really real view about what are we up against? What's next? So I think that kind of that when in balance, it can be a real asset to be positive. But when we over-index, we're in the toxic zone.
So there was an equation that we made a few years ago, I think, in Field Notes, where we were talking about always positive about people. And then we didn't use the word cynicism, but we used skeptical, I think, around the results, right? And so there was actually 3 parts to the things that we should be positive about all the time. And one part, Meghan, you used the word cynicism earlier. You weren't necessarily talking about, but when do we deploy cynicism, right? We're optimistic about people. We're optimistic about our strategy. We're always going to be, skeptical about the results, right? Or the tactics, maybe. Where is that cynicism placed? Where is it that is in a balanced way deployed?
Yeah, it was funny when I was thinking about this conversation. I may or may not early career have been gifted a little sign for my desk. It said cynicism with a smile. For those of you that remember Dilbert, a little visual of Dilbert with cynicism with a smile. And I actually had that very proudly because I think I fashioned myself, especially early on, as a contrarian. I'm going to kind of bring up what we're not talking about. I worked for many years within a very polite organizational culture. And I think that would I think I lost it over time, realizing it's not always strategic to be the contrarian and be the kind of cynical voice. So you have to be strategic about it. But I think maybe when done well, cynicism, I think, can it expand the conversation? Can it be a little contrarian or be a foil for, have we not thought about this? Or what about this? I think there's a way to use it strategically, as with everything. Positivity.
Well, and you're pointing to something that Mike and I have talked about in the past, which is we often see junior people who are maybe highly educated, maybe being very highly paid to analyze problems and risk and these other things. And I've coached in some of these circumstances, and they're pretty grim. Like, I mean, they're always kind of like, well, here's the problem. And I said to a group of these people, well, who's the leader that you wish you would be? Can you envision who that is? There a leader you admire? And then I said, how many of you see that person as sort of dour? And they don't, right? And I said, well, when are you going to change your personality? Because the leaders you like are ultimately, they're inspiring and encouraging. So now let me ask this. If you can ground, and I was driving last night with a friend who's an author, now actually on the bestseller list on the New York Times. And I was passing a place and I said, last time I was in there, I heard Martin Seligman give a talk, the father of positive psychology, and his book, Learned Optimism. And he said, people have a positive explanatory style or a pessimistic style. And that people that have a more optimistic explanatory style tend to out-earn, outlast, outwork, have all of these other better outcomes, except in one category, that those with a pessimistic explanatory style are slightly more realistic. And he's like, I wish it weren't true, but sometimes optimists live in a little fake world, right, of their own imagination. And his point was this: if there are going to be catastrophic results, physically, financially, emotionally, whatever the category you want to pick, if you have a plane and it's February and it's a little bit warm, but they're trying to decide, do we de-ice? You actually want a pessimist in the cockpit to say, we're going to de-ice again. What you don't want is the other pilot saying, I don't want any of that negative talk. I envision a beautiful takeoff. And if you just are with me, we're going to achieve. No, you're going to crash, right? So I have always liked that, which is to say, on balance, if there's not a huge risk, can you be too positive? I'm not sure that you can. Now, you don't want to look like you're just, crazy town, but I think you can keep that in mind. But I think your team needs you to recognize, they don't need you looking at disaster and pretending to be positive when you're like, oh, we actually need to de-ice right now because it could be catastrophic.
Yeah, what does it do if you are constantly positive about people, but then there's like one person in the room where everybody knows that they need to be knocked down a peg, but you're always positive, and then in one moment of weakness or whatever it is, you say out loud as a leader, yeah, that person, and you let the reality slip out one moment. That actually helps the room to like galvanize around the idea of like, okay, my leader's opinion is my opinion as well. Like, and so this is not an excuse to throw people under the bus, but stating reality, even when it has to do with people who you're supposed to always be positive about, can actually have a really good effect on a team at times. Wouldn't you think?
I would definitely say, in terms of, it plays into the whole, psychological safety. If I think that, in this space, we only bring the bright side, we only talk positively,
right.
We only pick,
very good point.
In versus what's out. No, I am less inclined to kind of address the risk or kind of state of concern or something that I'm seeing repeatedly and kind of wanting to bring to the conversation. So I think it becomes like a less safe environment, if you will. If there isn't we're not in balance. Scott's to your point, in terms of there isn't space for all of it, both what we feel is exciting, something we're feeling really bullish about, and things that we're concerned about. There are genuine concerns of a table that it will serve us. And I think that's really, when you were both speaking, and I was thinking of really what's in service. What's in service right now? Is it more, kind of bend more towards what's realism, kind of what feels true. What are the watch outs? Things are going so well. I have a client recently who things are going really well. And so he's a little bit like things are almost going too well because he's navigated some ups and downs in previous quarters. So it's more about kind of, well, let's just anchor that a bit. What's the watch outs? What's going well? How do you, kind of more of what we want, less of what we don't? What conversations do you not have? Because it's going so well? Is there, kind of what are you looking around the corner? Who are you enlisting, help and other perspectives from? So I think that's really, I think that's, it comes up a lot, I think, in coaching. There's so much humanity in what we do. Sometimes for leaders to recognize my need to keep everything super positive may not really align with the group's, kind of need to really understand what's happening, where are we going, what's the tone, and what's the larger context. How do I actually cheer them on in the right direction, give them what's in, but also really anchor to what's out. So I think everything in balance. I think it's it's a much more strategic way to lead forward.
Better. Like it.
Great encouragement to flex. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. That's
Thank
another
you.
edition of Lead Better. We'll do it again tomorrow, probably. Like
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Meghan.
Of course. Thanks for having me.